love this picture, it's so beautiful. I mean, his great-grandmother holding her purse with those gloves. I'm just like, I do not know who the photographer is. So at a very young age, this is a drawing that Romare did of his home, the area that he grew up in. And it says Charlotte up there, and then that is handwriting of one of his family members that signed that they owned actually. So you can see here that Romare, he labeled porch, there's a sidewalk, there's these other buildings adjacent to this main house here. And so, once again, community was a very strong and centering for him. And can you believe this kind of drawing from a young child? So I'm going to transition from Charlotte, North Carolina, to, can anybody guess where this is?
Pittsburgh.
Yes, very good. Pittsburgh. This is Pittsburgh in about the 1920s. His maternal grandmother ran a boarding house for steelworkers in a neighborhood called Lawrenceville, which is just up the river from downtown Pittsburgh. And so during this time period, the sun rarely shined because of all the pollution. And so there were a lot of steel workers that came through his grandmother's boarding house, a lot of black people, because they were segregated and they couldn't find other places to live, so they would stay short-term at his grandmother's house. So in the summers, Romare would stay with his grandmother and got to know some of the friends, some of the neighborhood kids in Lawrenceville. And so you'll see in some of his work, the smoke and steel mills and labor, people working, which will bring me to this next image of some black steel workers. This is a picture from Pittsburgh during the same time period. And Romare, once again, had connections with these people that were transient coming through his grandmother's boarding home. And so Romare, what really influenced Romare earlier on, beyond his parents, was this child by the name of Eugene. Eugene had disabilities, and he was a drawer. And so with Romare's grandmother's boarding house, there were some unsavory things that would happen there as well. I wouldn't necessarily call it a flop house, but you could. There were some aspects of it. And so Eugene and Romare would take to drawing some of the kind of unsavory things that they saw. And Eugene would take to drawing on brown paper bags. And there's a story about his grandmother, Romare's grandmother, finding these paper bags and asking them, "Where did you get these?" And they're like, "Well, we drew this." "Well, where'd you get this imagery?" Right here in this establishment. So she immediately confiscated them and told them, "Here's some better paper to be drawing, and there's some other things like the outdoors that you should be drawing, like landscapes." So with that paper bag construction over there, once again, those are some things you probably wouldn't have known that, where some of that came from. So this image, as you can see on the left, this is kind of like an homage to his grandmother and her boarding house. You'll see how she's setting up the meals, the dinner table, and all the way to the left, you'll see those smokestacks. This is once again a place, Pittsburgh, during this time frame, this time period of Romare and staying with his grandmother, excuse me. And he did go to school in Pittsburgh off and on twice. So when he was in middle school, he went to Pittsburgh for a year, and then in the summer times he would visit his grandmother. And then he also actually graduated from Peabody High School, which that high school is no longer there. It's now called the Obama Academy, but that building still exists. And I love the composition and how he's assembling things. Even light, even although it's black and white, there's the way in which he illuminates light in this composition. I found it to be a very striking image. And even kind of like the facial expressions on her face and lines, how he's arranged this. I thought it was just a very elegant way of paying tribute to labor and women who are there working and providing that support for the men working in the steel mills. It's a combination of both. Because Romare worked not only in paper, magazine clippings, watercolor, printmaker. There's so many different mediums that he employed in his work in different periods of time. So he moved away from magazines to construction paper and colorful construction paper. You'll see towards kind of like the 60s on, he moved away from actual magazine clippings. He still used them, but he kind of went away from that. That's a good question. So this image, and as you probably all know about Romare and his influence on a lot of European artists like Picasso, Cezanne, Gauguin, Matisse, he would then reinterpret this from like an African lens. And so this image here, his friend Eugene died at a young age. And so what he did was he put together this image, and this is called Eugene's funeral. And you'll see that there's a casket right there, and all of these people that are at the funeral. It was a really devastating event in Romare's life. He never forgot his friend Eugene, and so for him to put together this quite exquisite image as a tribute to his friend who died very young. He wasn't even 20 when he I don't remember how old he was, but he was a young, like he was like a teenager when he passed away. If anybody knows the age, please tell me. I don't remember at this point in time. But anyway, this reminds me of Emmett Till. He wasn't murdered, Eugene wasn't murdered, but the way in which I see images of Emmett Till and how people have paid tribute to young boys who've lost their lives. This kind of reminds me of some of the images that I think of. So we're going to go to when Romare Bearden was in college. He started out at Lincoln University, and then he transferred to NYU, and that's where he graduated. And he was a cartoonist, and this is a cartoon, an illustration that he did for the NYU's newspaper. And you'll see he actually graduated from NYU with a BS in mathematics. So you see there's the mathematical equation, there's a professor, and then there's a whole bunch of students there. That's something else that a lot of people didn't know, that he was good in science and math as well. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about his time at NYU and shortly after that. So he graduated in 1935, and from there he was embraced by a lot of different artists of that time period during the Harlem Renaissance and shortly thereafter. People like Charles Halston, who was his cousin. They were cousins. He actually went to a public school in New York City with Norman Lewis. Norman Lewis was a couple of years older than him, but they were very close friends. And so they worked together. They critiqued each other's work. So when Romare was working as an illustrator and then kind of transitioned to abstract work, that's a later work. There's an earlier work in the 50s over there. Norman Lewis was there supporting him. And also his cousin, Charles Halston. Augusta Savage, who started the Harlem Artists Guild with Charles Halston. They all worked together. There was just this very good, tightly knit group of artists working during the Harlem Renaissance and after, of course. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about, does anybody know about the WPA? The Works Progress Administration. Romare was also part of that with his cousin and a whole bunch of other artists. And so that was really shortly after, in the, I'd say, 1930s and early 40s. So some of his influences, as I said, was Picasso, right? And I find it very ironic that Romare was influenced by Picasso, who was influenced by a lot of African artists. You know, so it was kind of circular and cyclical, excuse me. And so you have this image here of a Cubist work by Picasso. And what I find really interesting about Romare Bearden, what he does is he kind of flattens the plane a bit and rearranges things from this African perspective. But yet, Picasso is looking at what African abstract artists were doing. So, this is a work from Picasso from 1913. It's oil, collage, and charcoal on canvas. And this next one is, of course, of Romare. Can you see the difference there? And this one is called He Is Arisen. And this is from 1945, and this is black and colored ink on paper. So I'm just going to go back to this Picasso one, and you can see the colors. And then to this. So this work by Romare is called The Visitation, and it's from 1941. This is tempera on composition board, and this is such a somber work. These colors, it looks as almost it's like chalk to me. It's just it's an exquisite work. Romare worked with religious iconography. And The Visitation, as we know, Mary. And you have these two black women kind of embracing one another. And then you have these rolling hills and this kind of yellow-orange in the background, setting the tone of this image. And so, and also this color, you can see this, of her fingernails. They're almost as if they're glowing, kind of like their mouths as well. So this is a photograph of Charles, his cousin, Halston, and Romare Bearden. Romare Bearden served a few years in the military, Pearl Harbor, in the early 40s. And right after he got out of the military, he had one of his first solo shows at a gallery in New York, which did very well. And this was an image taken at the time of his solo show. And here he is just talking to his cousin about this work. Once again, there's some religious iconography going on in this work. And he's in well-dressed. They're both in suits, of course. But I really like this picture as well that kind of shows him in conversation with his cousin about his artwork. I'd be curious to hear what they were talking about during that time period. This is a group of the WPA artists, and the man in the suspenders, that is Charles. And then there's some other people in here that I can identify. Gwendolyn Brooks, who's to your, she's to the your left lower left down there. It's a group of artists working, doing murals, doing education, outreach in the different neighborhoods during this time period. I'm not sure if this is in Harlem, but one could guess it was probably the case, but I don't know. I don't know the actual location when I was doing my research about this image. This image is of Romare, who's on the left, with one of the abstract expressionist artists, Carl Pulte, and Joan Moreau is on your right. And they're all at Carl's, his studio, smoking, drinking, having a great time, working on their respective work, and also critiquing one another. And this image is dated 1948. And once again, Romare is straddling both worlds. So he's living in, upper Manhattan. He's living in Harlem, but then he's also, the uptown crowd is in Harlem, where a lot of the African Americans are, and then the downtown crowd, like these gentlemen, were kind of where the white European people were hanging out. So Romare would travel up and down. And he was pretty fluid within the context socially with these different worlds that he was navigating. And that also influenced his work. And also that in the 40s, he had a gallerist, a white gallerist, that came to him and asked him, I would like to, put you in a show and you have your own show. So that was quite remarkable for that time period. If you're thinking about, pre-civil rights, that's pretty remarkable because I think about Norman Lewis working at this time period, and he's working alongside Jackson Pollock and a whole bunch of other artists, and yet he's not getting that type of, I would say, treatment from other white gallerists. And so it was quite interesting for me to see that Romare was operating like this. And one could say that colorism could be a factor in all of that as well. I don't want to make assumptions, but I do think that did have something. I mean, he was a very talented man, but, colorism is alive and well, and that was also something that was happening during that time period as well. So this piece is called Blue is the Spoke of Water, White the Bones of Men, and this is about 1960. This is an abstract work by Romare, and I wish I could see this in real life. This is in a collection of a collector in New York. But anyway, this looks like, because he traveled the world. He traveled to Asia, and this is a piece that was influenced by his travels to China. I wanted to show a little bit about his work, the work that he influenced his travels. So the one on the right is Nanette Bearden, his wife. They got married in 1954. Nanette was a choreographer and dancer. And I guess I should back up a little bit. So during the 50s, there isn't a lot of documentation about Romare and his work. So if you see, there's not much. There are some works that he's made in the 50s, but it's not as prolific as, say, his 40s, his 60s, and 70s, up until his death. And he did have a nervous breakdown in the 50s, and that kind of stalled his creativity. And so when he got married, he started working again. And so this picture is from 1954. And one of the beautiful things about their relationship was, so she was a choreographer and dancer, and she had her own dance company and theater company. And so Romare collaborated with her. So he actually did some stage sets for her, and he did do some costumes at one point in time. I've never seen those, but that's what I've read about. I've not seen any images about of any of the costumes that he made. Spiral. Anybody's familiar with the Spiral group?
Yes.
Here?
Yeah, they had a show at the DIA with some Spiral.
Yeah. A whole bunch of great writers and visual artists were in Spiral. And Norman Lewis was one of them, of course. And Spiral was formed in 1963, right before the March on Washington. And a lot of black artists wanted to come together to help in participating and being proactive in civil disobedience of the civil rights movement. And so this logo here of Spiral is, I need to read this here because I don't want to mess this up. Okay, so the group selected this image as their logo because the spiral moves outward and embraces all directions. And so it was this kind of idea, this notion of the future and being in space and the universality of all of this work that the output of the work that they were doing at this time period. So it wasn't even just about the visual arts, it was about dance, it was about literature. You had people like James Baldwin writing, you had Richard Wright, you had all of these people coming together during this time period. And so, you know, if you think about that, you think about Spiral and you think about something like today, the contemporary, I want to say contemporary version, but like Black Lives Matter. There's some borrowing of movements that I can see with Spiral and some other groups back then, like 306, and then with some other movements that are happening today. And so one of the quotes that Romare said about the Spiral group, he said, "We hoped with our art to justify life," and I felt that was a very profound statement of his. And I had that written down. I have that over my desk in my studio. So, Romare Bearden and August Wilson. People familiar with August Wilson, and you all know he's from Pittsburgh?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, great. Well, there was some really strong influences that they both had with one another, yet they never met. So, Romare Bearden was born in 1911, and August Wilson was born in 1945. So there's some works that Romare Bearden made that influenced August Wilson in his place, like the piano lesson. The piano lesson that Romare Bearden made in the early 80s, August Wilson actually took some of the silhouettes and facial features, and he basically wrote the piano lesson based off of Romare Bearden's work. Yet they never met. August Wilson was actually quite obsessed with Romare Bearden. There were times where he would stand outside of his studio and would be so nervous that he wouldn't even ring the doorbell or knock on the door. He was just so nervous in meeting him. And so one of Romare Bearden's studios was right near the Apollo Theater. And August Wilson would, pace back and forth, hoping that he might bump into him. So this is an excerpt from a poem by Romare Bearden about August Wilson's place. And I'm going to read this to you, although you can see it. So this is an excerpt, okay? So what is it? I'm trying to remember. The clock has stopped. Now I can never know where the edge of my world can be. if I could only enter that old calendar that opens to an old, old July and learn without unknowing things know. So if anybody has seen any of August Wilson's plays, it's a 10-cycle play, and it starts from the beginning of the last century, and it goes up. You know, every decade he has a play, he makes a play, and it's set in that time period. And so Romare Bearden is looking at what August Wilson is writing and acting, and yet here's August Wilson looking to Romare Bearden's work and shaping some of his plays. Yet they never met. Here is the piano lesson, and once again, this is really fascinating for me, is Mary Lou Williams, who pianist, choreographer, writer, just amazing, sublime woman. So she grew up in Pittsburgh, in East Liberty actually. And so here you have the piano lesson, and Romare was inspired by Mary Lou Williams. And so this is a woman, a teacher, teaching this child to play the piano, right? So if you look at this piano, there are some really interesting ways in which Romare is rendering this piano. I mean, there are some African motifs, symbols going on in this arrangement here. But yet, so here's Romare Bearden looking at Mary Lou Williams, who's from Pittsburgh. And then you have, once again, August Wilson looking at what Romare Bearden is doing. And so he basically takes the title, The Piano Lessons, and that's one of his plays, which is, the setting is in 1930. So, and also, another interesting fact about Romare Bearden, when he would do any type of arrangements as an homage to Pittsburgh, you see a lot of reds and oranges, those types of colors in his work, because he kind of separated different landscapes and colors based on place. So you'll see different color arrangements, say, in works that have to do with Charlotte, North Carolina, or Harlem, and you'll see some other color arrangements that are different in Pittsburgh. And so once again, you see these orange and reds, and yes, this is a place, whether it's an actual place in Pittsburgh, but this is actually conceptually Pittsburgh. This mural was done by Romare Bearden in 1984. This resides in Pittsburgh at the Gateway Center. It's our very lame subway system. I wouldn't even want to call it a subway system. But you can only go downtown into a small portion of the suburb, and that's it. Oh, and it takes you to our stadiums. So anyway, this was installed in 1984, excuse me. And this was one of his largest murals. These are ceramic tiles. There's over 700 pieces. And when our transportation company had to demolish this one station to dig a tunnel to nowhere really to the stadiums, they actually were going to tear this down. But a lot of people in Pittsburgh rallied, petitioned, and so we actually had somebody come to appraise this, and they actually ended up appraising it for about $12 million. And it cost Romare $90,000 to make this in 1984. And so we had to pay a preservationist, a company, to come out. And this was using new technology. It was about $1 million for them to remove this almost tile by tile, different sections. And they actually moved it to the new T station. So if you're ever in Pittsburgh, go to Gateway 1 T station. Our downtown's very small, and it's there. It's beautiful. They restored it. And we're so happy that this jewel was not demolished.
And I think that, and also our transportation system was in a financial crisis too. And when they found out that this was worth that much, they even thought about trying to sell it. And of course, we were like up in arms, just like the DIA, right? People were up in arms about, no, you can't, you need to be fiscally savvy and, with your money, and you're not going to sell this. Just because you first wanted to demolish it, and then when you found out it was worth a lot of money, you're going to try to sell it. So we're just really happy that that didn't happen. But this beautiful mural does reside in Pittsburgh, and I can tell you a little bit about it. So once again, Romare was looking to kind of European aesthetics in this composition. We have three rivers that join together at the point, and you'll see the rivers flowing together and coming to the point. On the left-hand side, you'll have these kind of colonial soldiers, and we have what is called Fort Pitt, because we were known for a lot of hills, and we had like the most bridges in the world, where we even beat out Venice. But anyway, Romare was really talking about kind of like the past and what kind of got Pittsburgh to this point. And so the founding of Fort Pitt Tunnel, which is over there to the left, you have these log cabins, you have this covered wagon, kind of like this new frontier. And I love it when people say they found something, but yet people were already here. So this is something else he was very aware of, and so he was a little bit subversive in arranging this mural. And so as it transitions over, you'll see in the middle there's kind of like this cascade of blues, and there's like these birds, these doves, these peace kind of symbols. And then working your way to the right, he is once again talking about our industrial age of steel and workers and labor. You have the silhouettes of these steel mill workers carrying their lunch boxes. You have the smokestacks in the background. You have this molten steel there. And so he's once again paying tribute to the labor, laborers. And so I love this mural. We're so happy that he actually did this 4 years before he passed away, because he passed away, he had cancer. And then I'll just leave you with this picture of Romare and a quote from him. He says, "The art of painting is putting something over something else." And so there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, if you think about the history of America and how certain truths get more play over others, certain narratives, things that get buried. And so that's a very, very profound statement. So that's the end of my talk. But I also have two other slides. I want to give a little shout out to George and Carmen for allowing me to organize a show in Pittsburgh at the August Wilson Center called Transform the Space that you may have heard about. I was able to organize 29 works from their collection. And this is one of them. This is before the first whistle. This is from 1973. It's print and collage on paper. And this is the actual image. This is the Robert Colescott image. And this is on view now through April 1st. And it's gotten a lot of great press and people coming to see it because their collection is a gem. And I wish more people knew about it. But I'm just so happy that I was able to organize a show and that they said yes. And that they have similar works. You all probably already know that, but I know a lot of people don't. And so bringing some of their works from their collection to Pittsburgh was pretty remarkable because I had a lot of my art colleagues from the Carnegie Museum, from the Warhol, coming to the show and saying, oh my gosh, we wish we had these kinds of works in our collection. And they were rather jealous, quite honestly. And so don't be, I'd say George and Carmen, if people from Pittsburgh might be calling you for certain pieces, because they were the Jack Linton, the Ed Clark, you name it, Howard Dean and Pendel, even the one that I had asked for, but you guys had already gone to NCA Chicago. That it's such a beautiful show, and if anybody has any time between now and April 1st, it's just only a 5-hour drive or an hour flight. I really encourage you to get out and see it. It's at the August Wilson Center, and it's downtown. So that's all. Thank you. Sorry, I went over my 30 minutes too. So any questions, comments, observations, thoughts? Yes. The photographs is his family? The drawing?
It's the one of the woman working in her kitchen. That's it.
The black and white. Yes, I mean in the books that I've seen it, I've only seen it in black and white. Yes.
I just wanted to ask a more personal question about Bearden. Did he have children? Are they alive?
Question was, did the Beardens have children? No. There's a Bearden Foundation in New York. Yes. Is there a Bearden Foundation attached to St. Louis? I don't know. Do you know something about that? Yes. There could be a presence there. I don't know though. I claim to not know everything about Bearden, okay? Yes.
So, can you tell us anything about the politics, since he was part of the Harlem Renaissance and went through the war, and it was interesting that he had a breakdown in the 50s, which was the Cold War period. So I was just interested in what his political views were.
He was not shy about how he felt about segregation, war, conflict. He was not shy about that. Is there anything in particular you were thinking of?
He wasn't targeted as one of the sort of red artists or associated with some of them? I mean,
not that I know. I mean, he looked to Diego Rivera for like his work. He loved his work. He was influenced by Diego Rivera. But are you talking about communism or anything?
There's a whole variety.
Yeah, that's fine. I didn't want to make exceptions, but I just,
I mean, many of these artists were, like James Baldwin was.
They were activists, absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes.
You don't know any specific relationships he had in jazz?
Oh, a lot. Really. Well, there's so much. I mean, I could go on. I mean, I could tell you a lot about his relationships in Pittsburgh to a lot of jazz musicians. I mean, Billy Eckstein, is from Pittsburgh, and Bearden co-wrote music.
And I could go on about
So, I mean, there's so much there. And I could go on about literary artists too. But, I only had a little bit of time, so.
I didn't know her.
I didn't know
In my
her.
research, I don't know that they ever met.
In my
It doesn't
research,
mean
I don't know that
something.
they ever met, but it doesn't mean that they
But
could
I
have
found
met
it
at
really
some point in
fascinating. I
time.
knew this a long time ago that.
But I
he
found
and
it really
August
fascinating. I
wasn't
knew this a long
You
time
would
ago
assume that
that
they
he
would
and August
because of
Wilson
that
never met.
influence.
But you would assume that they would because of that influence.
She was a big influence on.
Oh, Jerry Allen taught.
Oh, Jerry Allen
University of
taught,
And she was.
at
she
University of
oversaw
Pittsburgh.
her estate.
and she was,
Yes.
you know, she, yeah, oversaw her estate and everything. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, indeed. Yes.
I saw artistic influences of Gauguin in some of his work, Jacob Lawrence, and then the mural was Diego Rivera inspired. So just thought I'd point that out. I thought
Great observation.
great influences.
Great observation. Yes.
The influence of August Wilson and Bearden, because when I saw the piano lesson, I always thought that he did that for August Wilson. What you're saying is that, so what you're saying is that August Wilson's work was
Yes.
influenced by Bearden.
And back and forth too.
Yes.
But the
And
piano
back and
lesson,
forth, too.
The work by
Yes,
Romare
but the
Bearden
piano
came
lesson,
first.
the work by Romare Bearden came first.
Sorry, if I come closer, I think it might start.
I'm sorry, if I come closer, I
Oh,
think
you
it
wanted
might
to see the
start.
piano?
Oh, you wanted to see the piano?
Oh, the play, yes, he did a play and it was.
Oh, the
set
play,
in
yes, he did a play and it was set in the 30s. But it was written in the 80s.
I know it's.
I know it's
Carmen?
confusing.
I just wanted to say that years
Yes,
and
Carmen?
years ago, I just wanted to say that years and years ago, at our school, in the art classes, they had them all out of the lodge. And you catch them all out and send them to me. You feel better every one. Just amazed. They're just amazed. I would be just to take this seriously. And he did to take this very seriously. And he did. And it was just really, I was just amazed at how
I
much.
know, years ago, one of my first jobs out of college.
Years ago, one of my first jobs out of college was as a curatorial assistant at Wood Street Galleries downtown Pittsburgh. It's part of the
In the
Pittsburgh Cultural Trust.
Public theater.
And in the Cultural
1999,
Trust, there's the Public Theater. And in 1999, he
was there.
his play King Hedwig was there. And his wife, who does the costume, Costanza, she does all the costume designs for his work, his plays. And he, like you said, I mean, he was so gracious, so modest. He was actually kind of shy about talking about his own work. He always wanted to know about you. How are you? What are you doing? What do you love?
I only met him one time. That was the only time I met him.
I only met him one time.
And
That
he
was
did
the
say,
only
he
time.
said, wow, black curator in Pittsburgh?
And he did say, he said,
That was only a
wow,
curatorial
black
assistant.
curator in
He was
Pittsburgh?
very happy.
That was only a curatorial assistant. So he was very happy to see that.
Do you know, for some reason, I'm looking at this word directly in front of us. I'm reminded of
Herbert Gentry? Yes.
Herbert Gentry?
Yes.
Yes.
I wonder if he, it seems to me like, we have obviously this is more representation. It seems to me like the colors and the brushes.
Oh, yeah, yes, they did know each other.
Oh yeah,
George is the
yes,
one-
they did
you
know each
Herbert
other.
Gentry is from
And George is the one,
And
you know,
once
Herbert
again, this
Gentry is
knowledge
from
that
Pittsburgh.
George
And once again, this is knowledge that George has shared with me, and because George has, you all have Herbert Gentry in your collection. So once again, there's this Rust Belt city, this Detroit and Pittsburgh and artists. It's really, yeah.
But yes,
They're like
definitely, Herbert Gentry.
siblings. But yes, definitely Herbert Gentry.
Did you want to say anything?
Oh,
Do I need to wrap it up?
did you want to say anything? Do I need to wrap it up?
Okay. Yes. And I'm sorry, Carmen, you were talking
Okay.
about Romare Bearden, and I was
Yes.
thinking about.
And I'm sorry, Carmen, you were talking about Romare Bearden, and I was thinking about
I met August Wilson, King Hedwig, and you were
August
talking about
Wilson.
Romare
I met
Bearden.
August Wilson with King Hedwig, and you were talking about Romare Bearden, and he critique your students' work.
I did not meet
right?
Bearden, sorry, y'all.
Yes, Bearden did. I did not meet Bearden, sorry y'all. It was it's August Wilson.
Even Jacob
Norma
Lawrence,
Lewis.
too.
And even Jacob Lawrence, too.
That's a good question. The work that I do.
That's a good question.
I don't want to put it on people.
The work that I do,
can draw some
I don't want
parallels
to put it
there.
on people. I mean, I can draw some parallels there,
I don't want to really speak for.
but
him,
I don't want to really speak for
I think
him.
there is.
But I think there is.
I mean, I was thinking about Augusta Savage too.
I mean, I was
She's
thinking
this
about
woman
Augusta Savage too. I mean, she's this woman
and you know,
working,
she still
this
is
black
kind
woman
of
working,
very-
and
very
you know, she
unknown
still is this kind of
artist,
fairly
because she's a woman,
unknown
because she's black,
artist.
dark-skinned
Because she
black
was a woman, because she was black, a dark-skinned
No, I
black woman.
I know.
But
On that.
no, I will.
But yeah, it
hold
is.
off on that.
It's very much so.
So, but yeah, it is. It is very much so.
I'm newer to Romare Bearden. When I first saw it, I noticed there's not like a consistency. It's not like consistency working in like your style. Like Jacob Lawrence, it's working over the years. Like in Jacob Lawrence, like you could see something from like he first started creating. It would be something like later on in his life, and there'll be some similarities. You know, like what worked. Well, it seemed like you know, like what. It seemed like you were taking different. You know why you want to take it weird. You know why you try to change up the style. So none of these pieces like really, you know, you'll have a group that looks like, okay, you know, one person created this, and then you'll switch it up for other pieces. You know why?
The question was, why did Romare Bearden change up his style? Yeah. I don't know the answer. I just think he was very curious and wanted to work and operate in different types of formats. Some artists choose to work in one particular style. I mean, he was just a dabbler in a lot of different things. I don't want to say dabbler. I mean, he was really a very rigorous artist. But I think that's great. I mean, if you think about Norman Lewis, if you think about Alma Thomas, she's, you know, she did a lot of figuration, she did abstraction, she worked in a wide range, and I think it's healthy for artists to do that. So,
It's just amazing that
yeah.
you know, like master so many different styles or create, you know, great work with so many
I mean, and even if you look at printmaking, I don't know if anybody knows much about printmaking. I mean, I only took a couple of different printmaking classes, but the different techniques that he's working with, I mean, doing colors like this, that's pretty hard. And being very accurate, that's no small feat to do. I mean, even with collage work, it's just not, he's just arranging pieces of paper. You know, there's a method to his arrangement. There's a balance. There's asymmetry. He's looking at, like, with his influence of going to China. So when certain people say, "Oh, my 5-year-old could do that," I'm like, actually, let me see if they can do that. You know, and how, like, with the religious iconography, and how, you know, what we see or what we know as classics, he kind of imbues the African classics. You know, so, I mean, he was a brilliant person. He was a brilliant artist. So,
Picasso tried a lot of different things too.
yes, definitely. Yes?
Just a quick observation and then a question. Partly an answer to this young man's question. Bearden was kind of pushed out of the galleries in the late 40s or early 50s. That whole campaign to elevate abstract expressionism. Anybody who had a Parisian influence was pushed out. Bearden, definitely. Now my question is, my understanding, which I just saw some brief description somewhere, was that his signature style, his collage style, originally, when he got involved with the Spiral Collective, that he was bringing all these magazine cutouts to the Spiral Collective, and they weren't quite as interested in doing something with it as he turned out to be. But I've just seen like a passing reference to that. I wonder if you have detailed knowledge of that.
I've just read about it. I mean, there's excerpts from, Emma Amos talking about him, so, excited about bringing these magazine clippings and all that stuff to do some advertisement campaigns around the civil rights movement. And the other artists were like, no, we need to do something else. And so he was basically left to do it on his own. So, you have people working in a group that might not see eye to eye. I mean, that happens all the time. But once again, there's so much to talk about him, and I only had a short period of time. But yeah, definitely. You had these big personalities in this group. And of course, during that time period, abstract expressionism was like the in thing. It was the in thing. So, yes. There was always with the art world, they're always wanting to go to the next big thing and abandon something else that somebody else might be really good in, like portraiture or painting. And right now, we're having this moment of painting, so which is beautiful. Thankfully, with the Obamas and the portraits of Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald, I think they're kind of fusing new life into portraiture. So, all right, one more question, and then we can wrap up.
I think back to your print classes or print classes. You see there are lithographs and serigraphs. Obviously, collage that are on display. But there's a term that I don't know. It's called holograph. So can you know what that is?
What was it?
I think it's called holograph.
Holograph?
Holograph.
Holographs.
Some of these images are holographs.
Yes.
Right?
I.
A holograph is a print made from a collage. First you make a collage, then it's inked up and run through a press.
Thank you very much.
Takes a village. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, and such a joy having you all here, speaking particularly the whole Pittsburgh collection. That's what I.
The mic,
Thank you. No, it's a joy having fellow here from Pittsburgh and talk about the Pittsburgh connection, like with the different artists who have that. And just so happened that's the largest contingency of my paternal side of my family is in Pittsburgh. And so I didn't grow up in Pittsburgh, but it's there. With Gentry, you spoke to her, Gentry. Him and Bearden also worked together. They have a little film that they have done. A Swedish filmmaker did something with Bearden, worked with Gentry doing a collaboration.
Is this available?
No, it's not available. It's just a small film. Okay. Well, anyway, thank you very, very much, and we appreciate your coming out.
Thank you.